Hey everyone, welcome back to the React course. I'm super excited to have you. Finally, we are done with all the setup and the basics that we wanted to talk about, and now we are going to start with our first topic, that is specifically React, and that is called JSX. Now, what I've opened up right now is the React docs that I've also introduced to you to in prior lectures, and I'm going to take my time and show you this right away. If you go ahead and you type reactjs.org, then you go to documentations, and the right you have a list of all the topics that they consider are main to JavaScript and specifically React. Now in this we are going to talk about JSX today. Now what is JSX? JSX is this weird looking thing that we seen in our past lectures and past discussion of React, this whole bit, but I waved my hand on details regarding this and told you that this is not actually HTML and this is JSX, but I didn't talk about anything more or anything less about this. I just said this is JSX. I didn't tell you what this is, how this works, and so on. So in today's lecture, I'm going to do all that with you. Now JSX is something I feel is really important for you to understand, because JSX is the representational UI unit that you are going to use throughout this course to apply your skills with whatever you are going to present to the user that you have for your app. Now I'm just in the meantime going to write some simple code so that we don't have to waste my time with it, and then we are going to look into some really good examples and understand why JSX is important. Then also refer to the docs and see what people of React think about JSX and why they invented JSX, and is there a different way to do this, and so on and so forth. So let me just boot our app once and see where we are. So I'm just going to print this message: welcome to our first React app. Okay, then I'm going to save this, and I'm going to say this out loud for a few lectures so that you get comfortable with these commands. So how do you start our JSX, or sorry, our React app in development mode? You say npm start and you press that, and it's going to take a few seconds, and this is going to pop up your browser on localhost colon 3000, because that's where our development server is going to complete once the compilation is successful. So we can see it's running here, and in our browser we are here, and it says welcome to our first React app. Cool. Now let's just shift back our focus and see something. I'm going to write some simple JavaScript, and this is just JavaScript till now. So let's just make a function, and I'm going to use arrow functions. So I'm going to call this random function. Okay, and then I'm gonna have no parameters, but I'm still gonna use this parenthesis, and I'm just gonna create this. Now this is the basic layout of the arrow function. We've already talked about this and you know this. Now knowing that you know this, let me just do something, and I'll just return something. So I'll return, say 2 plus 2. Now you know the answer is 4. I know the answer is 4, but I just want to experiment a little. So say I want to use this inside my UI, and what I specifically want to use is I want to use the output of this function inside my UI. Then what I can do is I can have a string pre-built. So what I can do is I can do something like this. If say I'm in just JavaScript world, right? So what I can do is I can be like, okay, so I need a string, so let me get a variable called string to screen. Basically the string I want to be presenting on the screen, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to have space answer is, then I'm going to put a colon, and then I'm going to use the concatenation operator, that is plus, and do the random function. Now if you see this is going to output something like answer is colon space and then 4. Now I have this stored inside the string to screen variable, but how do I put this entity inside my UI? Because whatever I'm seeing on the screen is this render function. all that I'm able to see on the screen comes from this render. Now what I'm returning is this JSX, and this looks like HTML, but it's not HTML and it's not JavaScript too. So, and with React I don't even have something like I can bind something to a DOM element, and then what I can do is I can look for answers in something. Also see, React might show you warnings at times, and it's important to ignore those if you know what they are meaning. So it says string to screen is a variable that's never used but made. So we haven't used it and it's there yet, so it's okay, and there is no problem. Our thing is still running perfectly fine. If I even refresh this, it still works completely fine. Okay, now how do I use JavaScript inside JSX is the first thing that I want to talk to you about. So I'm going to show you the syntax how to do that, and what you can do is you can have a paragraph or any JavaScript entity, or what you can do is you can use curly braces. Now open curly braces and closing curly braces mark that this right here is going to be an expression, and everything inside this is going to be evaluated by JavaScript as an expression. So here I can say, okay, I'm going to use this variable here and I want you to print whatever its value is. If I go back on the screen and I see the answer is 4. Now if I don't want to even do that, and I can just take this whole bit here and I'm just going to cut it, and I'm going to remove this and I'm going to put it here. I'm going to save this and I'm going to see it still is the same. Now you might be thinking that it didn't reload or something, so I'll go ahead and bust that bubble once, and we can clearly see that it did reload. So, and we are still seeing the same answer. So what's happening inside here? In our UI, if you want to use any JavaScript expression or anything that we need to get evaluated, or we need to use some sort of JavaScript mechanism, then we use these curly brackets. Now there are two things that you can put inside JSX syntax. One is this simple string thing that is not supposed to be evaluated, and the others are curly brackets, and inside those curly brackets are expressions in JavaScript that are supposed to be evaluated. Now when React comes across this syntax, what it does is it takes this, it parses this through a evaluation mechanism and converts it into the appropriate string that is supposed to be replaced by this. In our case, it is going to be replaced by this. So if I am JavaScript and I am evaluating this at compile time, what I'll do is I'll just take this, evaluate this, and I'm going to find that the answer is this, and I'm going to replace this whole bit with this. So, and this might be saying that I don't need this function anymore because I'm not using it. So I'm going to save it again, and I'm going to see that the answer still remains the same. Now if I go to the inspect and if I see where this comes from, and you can clearly see in our HTML we just have this bit, and from the prior things, if I had showed you that, it will be still the same. So that is one thing you can do with JSX. But what actually is JSX? Let's talk more about that. So JSX is nothing but it's extension of JavaScript. In what sense is this an extension of JavaScript? Is that you know that React has two main parts to it: the logic and the rendering bit, which is the UI that is going to be presented to the user. Now these two things are supposed to work intertwined in the sense that they are supposed to work together. The logic somehow controls the UI, and in that case you need a way to have the logic interact with the UI. Now prior to React, there are also technologies that use this idea of having a logic bit and having a rendering logic, or just a UI bit. And the concepts that were available prior to JSX or something like that were templating. Now what templating is basically it's an idea that you have the UI in a completely different place and you have the logic in a completely different space, and what you do is in the logic space you somehow get a reference to that UI. Say the UI is in a file called index.html or template.html if that suits the situation better, and you have a Python script that is running the logic. Now what will happen is in the Python script via some method call, you will get all the content of that template, and depending on your logic, you will change certain parts of that template. Now when you change the certain parts of that template, what you are doing is you're isolating both of them and merging them on the basis of whatever you want. React also has this idea, but in a different sense. What they want you to do is they want you to have a clear differentiation between what is UI and what is logic. And whatever the UI is inside this render. All this is just UI, and it's only gonna be responsible for the UI bit. Now, what they also want you to do is they want you to have those two things because they are ideas that work together. The UI and the logic are supposed to work together. They are not supposed to be so isolated that they are in different files. So what they introduce is this idea of JSX that help you represent JavaScript in a syntax that is similar to what you have known prior to coming to React, that is HTML. So this syntax looks similar to HTML, but it's not actually HTML. What they do is inside, whenever the React app is compiling, they convert all this into class-based syntax. So it's going to be converted to something that will be classes that come from React. So I'm going to talk more about what that syntax looks like, and you can also use that if you want to, but in the future or in later part of this video you will see that that syntax is not something that you will like to use for a bigger app, because that becomes really nasty to manage and think about, because that brings a whole new dynamic to the situation. But ignoring that for a while, now let's just think. Now what will happen is we'll have some logic. Let's say my logic is this. Inside my app, what I have is I have a variable called this. Okay, let's just call it toggle. Now toggle is something that switches something on and off, and I'm gonna make it false for now. So what I wanna do is I wanna have a variable called toggle and it's false right now. Okay, sounds good. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna have a simple equation here that I'm gonna ask. Say it's a paragraph, and I'll say not showing answer. Now what I want to do is, in case if the toggle is false, then I want to show this bit, this right here, and if the toggle is true, then I want to show the answer. Then there is a logical decision that is supposed to be taken based on whatever there is in the logical UI, but that will affect how the UI is represented, right? This toggle is gonna control if this is shown or this is shown. Now I need a mechanism to use something of something like that, right? I need a mechanism so that I can control logic inside my UI. Now we can use the same trick that we did before. I can use expressions, and what I'll do is I'll use brackets, curly brackets, and I'll go toggle is equal to, and triple equals to means comparison in a strict sense that you already know with JavaScript, and I'm going to use tertiary operator here. And this is a really common way of doing this, and you will see a lot of this in future lectures. So what I'm doing is I'm having a single condition that I want to make a decision based on. Say toggle, if toggle is say true or false, I'm going to show one, and if it's something else, I want to show the other thing. Now what I could have done is I could have just ignored this comparison, and I could have just let toggle be something. Now this will evaluate to something, and if this is true, the first thing would have happened, and if this would have been false, the second thing would have happened. But for this particular example, I just wanted to be explicit, and I'm explicitly checking this whole thing that if toggle is actually a boolean false or a negative value, right? So in that case I'm not going to show the answer, but if it's not that and I'm supposed to show the answer, then I'm going to show the answer. Now I'm going to do something nice here, and I'm just going to wave my hands at some detail, and I'm just going to do 2 plus 2. so that we are also sure that in this thing also we are evaluating some JavaScript. Now I'm gonna save this, and it gives me an error that toggle is not defined, so I'll just define it, and I forgot the let, I guess. So let toggle be this, and if I save this, okay, I'm supposed to write this outside. Just a second, sorry. So here I go. Now it compiled successfully. Good. Now if I go back and if I see, it says not showing the answer because toggle is false. Now if I convert toggle to true, then you will see that answer is 4. So what I am doing is I'm essentially controlling how the UI is rendered based on some logic that I've defined. This is how JSX allow you to have the logic and the UI in the same file. Also, if you have noticed, this becomes a little easier to control the UI based on the logic if they are in the same file, because at once you have a layer at both of the things. Now you know what is the actual logical condition and what is supposed to be rendered. If both these things are separated in different files, then there is a problem that you have to switch between two files and you have to encounter that. So what people of React while designing React thought that it will be a better idea and it'll have an easier time on the developers to have both of these in the same file. So that's how they came up with this idea of JSX. Now we've already found out that how we can use JavaScript elements inside this. What else we can do with JSX? So I'm gonna take us back to the documentation, and I'm gonna go through the documentation with you for a while so that you can have a good idea of how to read the documentation one. Now let me just clarify one thing. If you ever want to use anything with React, say, the documentation is the best thing. I know there are blogs and other mechanisms to learn, videos and tutorials and everything, but every single bit of information that is available regarding a specific technology is available here in the documentation. So jumping to the documentation, this is a good place to start. Why they had JSX? So they clearly mentioned that they had factor rendering logic and was inherently coupled, which means they knew that rendering logic and UI logic is going to work together. Now they don't want to separate it in markup and separate files, so that's what I talked to you about. So they decided to opt for something called JSX, which lets you have those in a combined form. Now if we go down, and I'm gonna show you how it's generated. So if you scroll down enough, we're gonna see the syntax. Now let's just go back and copy this example for once, and I'm going to talk to you about the process of how this conversion happens. But before that, I'm just going to comment this whole thing because I don't want any errors to be happening. Now I'll save this, and it tells me that I don't have toggle because I just deleted it, and I'm going to delete this whole bit for now. Now let's talk about how React actually evaluates your JSX, and then we are going to look into something called passing parameters. Okay, so how React actually evaluates your JSX is, inside the render it will encounter a return, and you can have other logical entities inside render also. So you can actually have a go like constant say hi, and or just greeting, and you can have a string hi there, and it's completely fine. But what the rendering logic is looking for is this return and everything inside this return. Now one thing that React wants you to do is React wants you to have a single parent, and when I'm going to explain why that is so, you're going to understand why is there a need for that. Now React wants you to have a single parent, and you can have multiple childs inside. So you can do whatever inside a single parent you want to, but React wants you to return a single entity. Now I'm going to do something because I know it's going to throw an error, and I'm already told you that I'm going to copy this and paste it again. And see here, as soon as I press save, it will pop me up a warning. So what it said is adjacent JSX element are wrapped in the closing tag. You might want to use fragments, and fragments are something new to JavaScript, and I'm going to talk to you more about that. But it clearly says that there is a parsing error because there are adjacent JavaScript elements. So there are actually two elements that are on the same level of root. So there is one element and there is two elements, and React doesn't want you to do that. So you just can have one single parent element that is returned. So one element can contain a lot of other things inside this, but the top level should be one and one only. There shouldn't be multiple things at the top level. Now that being cleared, I'll save this again, and I see the warning is gone. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just show you that I already showed you that you can create variables inside here, and you can also use this inside the logic. So let me just quickly do that, and I'm going to use greeting, and I'm going to save this, and I'm going to go back, and hi there, the greeting is there. Cool. Now let's talk about how this actually gets converted. So what happens is, as soon as the render is encountered, this whole thing is taken out. Now this parent is created, and how this parent is created is React converts this logic to something called react.createElement, and I'm going to make a comment again. And so what will happen is, during the compilation cycle, what will happen is the top level div would be converted to something called react.createElement, or let's not just use this comment. Actually, let's go ahead and create some JSX or layout logic with this syntax. So I'm going to remove this, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to do react dot create element, and I'm going to create a div. Okay, now what this will do is it will give me a single element, and what that single element is a div, and what is this similar to is this is actually similar to this. So this whole bit here, right here, gets converted to this bit during the compilation. Now what I had previously was I had something that will go with this. So say I want to have a value inside this div, and I want to say a string hi. I didn't intend to do that, right? This is what I want. Now if I save this, it says that the greeting is no more there, so I'm just gonna remove this greeting bit. Fine, compile successfully. Let's go back and refresh our page. Now it doesn't show me anything, and there has to be a good reason for that, but let's just see what is happening. So the return is there, and it's creating an element, and it's giving us that element back, and I'm putting the value high inside there. So okay, this looks good to me. Let me just go back and check how the HTML looks. I have this root, and inside this root I do have a div which I just created. Here is my div, but the value is not coming inside here. Okay, let's just try to remove this render if we can, and now save this, and tells me that it must return something, and I want to return this for sure. If I go back and if I save this again, and I didn't want to do that, I'm gonna save this again, and nothing changes. So let me just copy this example once, so that I can be sure that I didn't do a writing mistake, because we copied that example from the React bit, so that can be a typo. So I'm just trying to be sure. Okay, that might have been a typo. Let's just change this one to div, and let's just remove this parameter because we are not reading this right now. So if we do this, and if we go back, and if we hit refresh, okay, so it might be a div thing as it's not showing div. So let's try paragraph. Okay, it's not showing the paragraph either. Okay, I get it, sorry, my bad. Fine, my bad. Actually it has to have 3 parameters inside, and when I was doing just 2 parameters, it was taking the second parameter as the third parameter, and it was not showing anything because it was not receiving any third parameter. So what's happening here is that this React object that we are taking from actually the React class has something called a create element. Now this function has this ability to create elements that are created by JavaScript. So this methods actually creates HTML but via different syntax. So this is going to create a div, and inside that div there is going to be something called hello world. But if you don't want to do that, then what you can do is you can use another React dot create element, and in this you can use the same thing. So if say I want to do the thing that I did previously and I want to have a paragraph, and here I want to say hello everyone, and then if I do this now, then what am I doing is I'm creating a div like this here, and let me just take this to a new line. Then I'm saying that I don't have any parameters to be passed to this, okay, and those might be, you might be familiar with attributes from HTML that you pass to tags. So this is where you pass all the attributes to your function or to this specific div element that you are creating using this create element. And what you are doing next is you're saying that to this there is a child inside this, and what that child is another paragraph that is created via the same create element thing. It also has no parameters applied to it or attributes applied to it, and the value inside that is a string called hello everyone. So what it will look like is it will be like something like this, and then there is going to be a paragraph, and this paragraph is going to be closed, and inside there I'm going to have that string hello everyone, and that's what it's going to look like. So if I save, and if I see, it says what I wanted to save, and if I go back and if I look into this, I have a div, good, then I have a paragraph and it says the same thing. So if you match this with what I have here, it's exactly the same. Now this is how React evaluates your JSX. You write this bit in JSX and gets converted into this syntax. Why this gets converted into this syntax? Because React is actually creating DOM elements for you. You are not doing any HTML with React. You are just using JSX. Knowing this is important because people often while writing representational unit, while writing UI units, think that they are writing something HTML or something similar to HTML, but actually it's not HTML, and this is just something that is called JSX, and it's specific to React only. And whenever your code is compiling, it gets converted to something called something of this structure. So why not use this structure in the first place? Because as you've already seen, I did an error while doing this, and I actually had an idea, and I've written this before, and I actually knew that I'm going to make a mistake, but I even made that mistake knowing that I'm going to make a mistake because I wanted to show you that this syntax is not as convenient as this one. Another big factor on this part is that using this syntax, writing complex UIs is going to be so complicated that it's going to get out of hand. Try to think about having a HTML structure with a header, a footer, a sidebar, a content, and navigation bar made using this syntax. Okay, your head hurts already, right? I can feel that because mine hurts too, because this is not as convenient as writing JSX. And that's why React is great, because you know HTML and you can write your UI in something that is familiar to you already, coming from HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and they convert that. They take all the load from you and they convert that. Now I want to talk to you two more things. So let's go back to our good old JSX because we like that more, and I don't want to write that class based or function based syntax anymore. So I'm going to do this, and I don't actually need to have line breaks or anything. I can write everything and anything in a single line or in a straight format, whatever I can feel, whatever feels me right. But just for like having a prettier feel to this and having a more structural approach to this. Now I also want to argue a bit about why the structural approach is better, because see, on the longer run, if you come back to this code and do all sorts of hacky things with this, and you come back to this after a year, say, you're not gonna yourself understand what you did. So writing good code and writing more structural code will help you, and you only on the longer run. So my personal suggestion to you is write more structural code. That way you will be able to debug it faster and understand in lesser time what's actually happening. So coming back to that, now this syntax is going to allow us doing some really nice things. React also helps you with some more things. Say you have something coming from some other place, say an API or say any other source, and that is a bad string. And what I mean by bad string is that it has some sort of hack or some sort of hacker person or some sort of bad guy is doing something. So I'm just going to take an example, bad script. Okay, now if I'm using the expression syntax that I showed you earlier and I use bad string here, React is by default is going to sanitize this for me. And what do I mean by sanitize is it's going to remove all the possible things like colons and semicolons and things that can get your browser or your server to misbehave. It's already going to sanitize that for you. So it also provides you a security feature. And if you go back with me to the documentation, you can clearly see that mentioned here. So JSX prevents you from injection attacks. And how it does that? Say you have something, a variable called title, and that is a malicious input. The user entered something that will break your user experience. Now you are using that directly into your JSX. That might cause a real big problem, and attacks like cross-site scripting attacks are possible due to that. React doesn't allow that to happen, and it gives you that title. Whenever you are using this, it already escapes that. So by default, React DOM evaluates any values embedded in JSX, being this, before rendering them. And what you mean by escaping is it actually sanitizes your inputs, or every single thing that goes through this JSX thing and gets evaluated, it sanitizes it so that attackers or other people can't take advantage of your app by providing some malicious input or something. So that comes pre-built with React, and it's a security feature that is really important in modern day apps, because modern day apps security is very crucial. Now let's talk a bit about how you can pass attributes to things like paragraphs and everything. So say I want to style my paragraph, and I want to style this specific paragraph, and I'm gonna say hey there, and I'm gonna style this. So I want this one to have a color of red. So traditionally, if you are coming from HTML, CSS and JavaScript land, you might be keen to do something like this. Style is equal to, now you will just say color colon red. That seems correct, and that can be correct, and if this was HTML, this was correct. But let me just save this and see if it's correct or not. So if I go back to our app, and we see nothing actually, so there is a problem. Let's see what our root looks like. And if you can notice that there is no expansion bar here, that means there is nothing inside the root yet. So there is a problem, and whatever UI we intended to create wasn't created. So what you need to do right here is, the style in JSX is not the style that is similar to that. So this is similar to the attribute passing, and in later lectures we'll see that this thing is called props. So how do you do inline styling? So what you do is you have an expression first. Now this bit is an expression, and right here all I'm doing is that I'm creating an expression, and it's going to evaluate some JavaScript for me. Now I'm doing styling inside JavaScript. So what JavaScript wants me to do is, and it's a React specific thing, let me clarify on firstly that. So what they want me to do is write whatever styles I want to have in a object. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an object, and this is how an object looks like. with an open curly bracket and closing curly bracket, and the other open curly bracket and closing curly bracket are just marking that I'm using JavaScript inside a JSX. Okay, now I'm going to make an object and I'm going to have a property called color, and I'm going to put a colon and I'm going to make it red. So what I'm essentially doing is I'm having an object which is having a key called color and the value is red. Then I'm going to passing that object as an expression to the style attribute. I'm going to save this and I'm going to go back and I'm going to see that this becomes red. Now I have a bar that expands and I also have a div and then I have a bar and I can see. Now here is the syntax that I actually wrote first, and if it was just HTML I would have written something like this. So style is equal to color colon red semicolon and done. But what React wants me to do is, if I want to style a component inline, what it wants me to do is pass an object, and to pass an object I need to have curly brackets on both sides to evaluate that object. Now on attributes and props you can pass two types of values. Either it can be an expression or either it can be a string. These two values are. Now you might be tentative to putting commas around here or double quotes or single quotes around here, and that is something that I used to do when I was learning React a lot, because that is the intuition coming from the HTML world. That is the intuition that to every single attribute that we are going to write, we are going to put, and we've learned it like that. It's in our typing process, or it's in your muscle memory if you're coming from HTML, CSS and JavaScript, that you put double quotes around all the property attribute values. So say if this was common, and you can clearly see here that there are double quotes indeed. This might be a problem and it might get you in some bugs, and so I just wanted to make that sure that you know that there might be a problem that you might be encountering while doing React yourself, and that might be a problem that is because of this syntax. So let's just go back and revise a little. So what are the properties that I can put to attributes? Either I can use a string or either I can use a evaluation thing. Now inside the evaluation I can use anything I want to. So let me show you another example. Say I didn't want to write it like this and I wanted to abstract this out. So what I can do is I can just cut it from here, go in the render. I'm going to create an object called let be styles, and this is something that is signifying that these are the styles that are supposed to be applied on the paragraph, and I'm going to create this object here. Now there is no stopping me from doing this because this is just JavaScript, and knowing where you can write simple JavaScript and where JSX starts is the first bit of information that I want you to learn. So everything inside the render and inside the return is JSX, but everything outside and everything in all other parts is just JavaScript. So you can do all the good things that you can do with JavaScript. So let's do something fancier. Let's actually build something. So let's have let div styles be something called, and I'm going to put a padding in here, padding and 20, and say if I want to put this in pixels, then I want to have single quotes or double quotes around this, but if you just want to write 20, then it's fine too. Now I'm have a padding and I'm going to also create a heading. So for h3 style I want to do let's do the color thing again. So for this I want to have a color blue. Okay, now let's do this and we are going to style this. So to style this we need to pass object, and we already have an object called div style. Now we're going to have a heading, and our heading is h3, and this is the colored heading, and let's pass style to this, our good old friend that lets us write JavaScript in JSX, the curly brackets, and I'm going to write the style h3 style, and back to our paragraph, and I'm also going to style it with its style, so p3 style or paragraph style, sorry. I'm going to save this and I'm going to jump back and see, whoa, everything is applied. We see our padding, we see our colors, and we see our colors. Now let's increase the padding so that we can verify that it actually happened. There were other ways to verify too, but I just want to experiment a little, and you can clearly see it moved forward. Now let's just make this really high, say 400, and okay, everything broke, but it was intentional, so let's just decrease it to 100 maybe. Yeah, looks so much better now, and we can clearly see that everything we are doing is applying properly. Now this looks way cleaner than writing that syntax, but when you go forward, you'll become more and more familiar with that sort of syntax, and then you will have that in your muscle memory, and when you'll get that in your muscle, you will stop using or stop relying on this. And there are various different ways to style your components, and that's actually going to take a specific lecture. There are specific libraries that let you style your components and let you style your JSX, and we are also going to use plain CSS for that, and we are going to look into how this line works and what this line actually means and how we can style our components, because there is a limitation that you might have found right now, that you are used to style your components in CSS, and this is styling your components with JavaScript. There are a lot of different things. Let me give you an example. Say you want to use the background color thing. So what you will do in plain old CSS is you will just be like background color, and that's not true in JavaScript land. So if you want to say background color, what changes is the middle part gets converted with nothing in between, and whenever there is a differentiation or two words that are combined, they get combined into camel case. So in JavaScript you're going to write something like this and say I want it to be CCC, that is some color, that is some gray. So we can clearly see that our div got grayer. So this is something that might be very unintuitive to you, and that is actually also unintuitive to me, writing styles in JavaScript. JSX is fine, it also comes a little naturally, but writing something like this becomes very tedious, and you have to learn a lot of new things, you have to learn a lot of new names that might be not comfortable with you. So we are going to have a particular lecture dedicated to all this in the coming times. For now, I just want you to be comfortable with the idea that whatever goes inside here is not HTML, it's JSX. You can have JavaScript elements inside this. Now those JavaScript elements can be treated as just placeholder values, evaluations. You can do conditionals as we looked into it, and you can do so much more with this. So there is no bound to this if you think about it, but we are going to learn more and more new things about this. In the coming lectures, I'm going to talk to you about a little more about rendering. Then I'm going to talk to you about something called props, and this right here, the thing I've been referring to till now is attributes, as attributes, and these are actually called attributes in HTML, but in React they're called props. And in the coming lecture I'm going to discuss both of these things with you in greater detail. And till then, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you learned a lot today about React, and finally some doubts that you might be having from past lectures are starting to get away, and you might start learning more. One more thing I want to point out is, if you ever want to go back and learn more about and learn more than I can ever tell you, then the place you want to go is the documentation. The document houses every single detail there is to be learned. On that note, I would like to take your leave for now, and I hope you enjoyed. I'll see you soon.